Hey there, it is Saturday afternoon on September 17th, 2016. I just wanted to make a quick little video here about Tropical Storm Karl, where it's going, and what the models have in the long range, because there's some pretty interesting features that are showing up in the long range, which I think are going to be an interesting discussion here. So let's dive into it. Right now, this is the current look at Tropical Storm Karl. You see it's pretty disorganized. Most of the thunderstorms have been blown off to the northeast side of the system because of some southwesterly shear. The center is actually located pretty close to about 18 degrees north and 40 degrees west, and you can see this a little bit better on the visible satellite. See, there's a clear, distinct spin, which has been moving to the west for the last couple of days, but now has actually begun drifting a little bit south of due west, which is an interesting feature. But you can see a clear center of circulation on the visible satellite here, with, again, most of the convection disorganized and disoriented off toward the northeast side, thanks to the shear. And Karl will probably remain pretty weak over the next 3 to 4 days, one, because of this disoriented look it has to it, but also because it's going to be fighting through some dry air. So even though the shear is expected to weaken over the next couple of days, you can see here on the water vapor that you have a lot of dry air out in front of the system here, as noted by the light brown and yellowish colors here. So most of these healthy thunderstorms are going to have a harder time building all the way around the system until it gets beyond 45 degrees west. Maybe we'll see some strengthening in that point. The National Hurricanes track, the official track here, kind of shows that it keeps as a tropical storm through day 4. It does have it becoming a hurricane in the day 5 time frame, which is where things become very, very interesting in terms of the global models, which I'll show you in a moment. But for now, it's going to remain on a general western track. They may have to adjust this a little bit south if what we saw in the visible satellite continues where it's drifting southwest. But in general, you've got a weak, disorganized tropical storm for the next few days, which should keep it south of 20 degrees west until it gets to around, south of 20 degrees north until it gets around 55 degrees west, where it will start moving a little bit northwest as the Atlantic Ridge weakens. So let's take a look now at the global models and what they have going forward. Let's pick up the GFS here on the... Let's check out the GFS on the surface pressure anomaly here. And what you have right now, here is the current picture of the GFS. It starts, here is Karl right here, right in the central Atlantic, about halfway between the west coast of Africa and the Leeward Islands. So it's pretty much in the middle of nowhere. We're going to put this in motion here with 6-hour frames, and you see the GFS keeps it on a generally weak stage. Big Atlantic ridge still holding over the for most of the ocean there, which is going to keep it going west for a while. And eventually we're going to run it off to a point we get about 6 to 7 days into the time period here. You see the GFS, this is right around day 7, 168 hours, so we're 1 week away. And it's made it pretty darn far west. It's made it all the way south of New England here, east of Florida, south of New England. GFS keeps it pretty weak, but this afternoon's run did get the system pretty far to the west, which is close enough, certainly, to keep an eye on. And then after this point, what's going to happen is it's going to start shooting it northeastward. It finds a weakness in the ridge, heads in the general direction of Bermuda, and begins to intensify, and heads north and east out to sea from there. If we take a look at the Canadian model, it's going to show something similar. Again, here's the current picture of the Canadian model. Here's Karl right here in the central Atlantic. Put this into motion. It's going to start moving in a westerly fashion. The Canadian, however, intensifies Karl more than the GFS does, so it is a stronger storm, and in fact, it's a bona fide hurricane by the time it gets to about the day 7 time frame. This is 156 hours, so a little bit short of the GFS, which is where the Canadian makes its furthest trip to the west. It's about due south of Maine instead of maybe western New England where the GFS had it. But in any case, the Canadian model has a strong hurricane here, making it pretty far to the west, but like the GFS, it eventually finds a weakness in the ridge and begins to travel away from the United States toward the northeast. This would be a major hurricane on top of Bermuda, as shown by the Canadian here, but it also, like the GFS, moves northeast and out to sea. So finally, we're going to take a look at the European model. European model only will have 24-hour frames. This one will jump a little bit faster. It's not as detailed as some of the other models. At least what's publicly available is not as detailed. So, but again, here is Karl. Similar to the Canadian, it it intensifies a little bit faster when it gets west of, let's say, 60 degrees west here, once it gets to the longitude, of the Leeward Islands, and begins to develop it pretty quickly. Just very, very similar to the Canadian here at day 7. A big, bona fide, solid Cat 1, maybe Cat 2 hurricane, south of Maine, east of Florida, not all that far from Bermuda, and just like the American and the Canadian models, the European is going to find a weakness in the ridge, and it's going to shoot northeast here over the next 3 days, and we can see this as it drops it down close to a Category 5 strength. This is obviously in the long range, so you can't take anything verbatim, but this would be a very, very powerful storm when it churns off to the northeast. So you kind of look at this and you say, okay, you probably have an out-to-sea storm, because all of the models agree that about day 7 it gets somewhere east of the Bahamas and then turns northeast. But there's a little problem with that, and I want to go into why these models are turning the storm northeast, and then why it might not be correct. And to do that, we're going to take a look at the 500 millibar setup. This is the GFS current 500 millibar setup. You can see a gigantic ridge over most of the North Atlantic here, depicted by these orangey reddish, pinkish colors, depending on how strong the ridge is. Let me go back to the live look here. And you can see that depicted across the entire Atlantic on the current GFS. When we put this into motion, we can see that over the next few days, the ridge is certainly holding. This is why Karl is going to remain in a generally westward fashion and not turn to the north anytime in the immediate future. And we can run this forward. But now, if we start running this closer to day 6 and day 7, which here this is now at 168 hours. So this is the point where, remember, where we had the GFS. If we go back over here and pull up the GFS model at day 7, we had Tropical Storm Karl sitting in that area like we talked about, south of New England, east of Florida, northeast of the Bahamas, and the reason why it's made it so far west to that point is because we had ridging. But now watch what happens once we get beyond day 7. You see these blue colors here beginning to intruding. They have taken over the north central Atlantic, and they will continue to eat away at this ridge on the northeastern side and blow open a weakness to where Karl can accelerate northeastward and escape out to sea, because there is no more ridging, and by the time you get towards day 10, the ridging is completely gone, and you actually have low pressure anomalies from the Rocky Mountains all the way out over to Iceland. So you see a total flip in the pattern here on the GFS. If we were to look at the European model, we would see something very, very similar. Here is the current look of the Atlantic. On the European model, again, we see lots of ridging, a very, very strong Atlantic ridge, forcing the system, which will force the system out to the west, and it remains strong for the next few days. This is day 4. And then we get out towards day 7 here. Again, you can see here is day 6, here is day 7, and again you see this feature diving off of the Canadian coast, eating away up the northeastern side of the Atlantic ridge, which eventually, by day 8, blows it open. You can see how much the ridge diminishes here between day 7 here and day 8, and eventually that creates the weakness for Karl to accelerate northeast as it intensifies into a bona fide major hurricane on the European model. You can see it becomes so strong after the day 5 period, it starts showing up even on these 500 millibar maps. But there's a little issue here, and if you want to let's take a closer look at why this ridging breaks down. And it's going to occur, if we pull up day 8 here again, on the GFS. Let's now look at this backward time. So this is the point where the ridge has been completely destroyed on the GFS by this feature over here. And if we run it backwards, let's watch where this originates. We run this backwards here, and you can see there's a little feature up here in the Hudson Bay around day 6 in the ridging. Very, very small feature. And if you watch this up here in northern Canada, it's not something you usually think about for tropical systems, but it dives to the south and it intensifies this area of lower pressure and just kind of destroys the ridge. You will see a very, very similar setup on the European model. You see this is day 6. There's a feature up here in the Hudson Bay. So I went backwards there. This is day 5 here. You see moving from west to east. And eventually this system is going to kind of hook this on the European here. It's going to kind of hook up with this other system that's already over the North Atlantic and just kind of create this huge area of lower than normal pressures and destroy the Atlantic ridge by day 8. And It's the fact that you destroy that Atlantic ridge, which is why in the long range you see all of these models sending the system out to sea. Which is fine except for one thing. There's something fishy about this. Let's take a look at what the models were showing a few days ago. Alright, so this look right here, that I just pulled up here, this is what the GFS model currently is showing for day 4. This is 96 hours out with a strong Atlantic ridge. Right? You see a system of lower pressure up here over Quebec, over southeastern Canada, but for the most part, the strong Atlantic ridge is holding. Now, what did it? So this is on Wednesday. It's 4 days from now. This is Wednesday. This is on Wednesday the 21st. What was the GFS model showing on Wednesday the 21st 2 days ago, when it was 6 days away? Right now, Wednesday is 4 days away. When it was 6 days away, it was showing this. Notice a stronger upper level low coming down from southeast Canada. It's overtaken New England in this image and has split the Atlantic ridge in half. You see these reddish colors are broken off the east coast of the United States here and to south of Newfoundland here by this upper level low. But now as we're getting closer, it's no longer the case. The GFS model now realizes the ridge is not going to break down that easily. What about the Canadian model? What was it showing? Well, here is what the Canadian model is showing right now for 4 days from now, on Wednesday the 21st. Again, a big, strong Atlantic ridge. The Canadian still has the upper level low getting a little bit further south than the GFS does 4 days from now. But again, let's take a look at what the Canadian was showing when Wednesday was 6 days away. Again, they completely blew up the Atlantic ridge. They created a big opening, which is why a couple days ago a lot of the models had Karl going east of Bermuda and way out to sea, because they were breaking down the Atlantic ridge like this. Finally, the European. What was it showing? So this is what the European is showing in day 4 right now. Again, a very, very strong Atlantic ridge. Holding, you see that feature still there in southeastern Canada, but not as strong as it was 6 days away on the GFS and Canadian. So for fun, let's see what the Euro. Now we're going to go to what the Euro was showing when Wednesday was 6 days away. Again, the Euro didn't fall for quite as much, which is why the Euro has been hugging the western edge of the path here. But again, when it was 6 days away, it had this feature stronger. It had it closer to breaking down the Atlantic ridge, but it didn't quite get there. And this is now, if we go back to live, we can see, the current forecast, Saturday's forecast for next Wednesday, a much stronger Atlantic ridge. Here is my concern. My concern now, I'm going to put the European here in motion, is that if all summer long the models have been trying to break down the Atlantic ridge too quickly, and if you live anywhere in the northeastern United States here, you know that the Atlantic ridge has been dominant for weeks, if not months, going back to July. It has been very dry, it has been very warm, and because the predominant pattern has been a very, very big ridge over the central Atlantic, western Atlantic, and eastern United States. That has been the pattern. And the models have consistently tried to break that down too quickly. And the issue here is, if they are breaking down the ridge too quickly again, and I just showed you that a couple days ago they were breaking the ridge down too quickly, and now that we're inside of 100 hours, they're not really too hot on that idea. Now we're seeing it again in the day 8, day 9 range where they break down the ridge. If they are wrong about this image right here, where it destroys the Atlantic ridge between day 7 and day 8, Karl is not going to go out to sea, because if this ridge is still here, if this ridge holds northeast of Bermuda, it's going to continue on the path that it was going on before that, which is a general west-northwest to northwest fashion, and it would actually be this feature back over the Rockies that would eventually break the ridge down from the west. That's the side we normally would see these ridges break down, and it would essentially be a race to the east coast between this feature over here and Hurricane Karl at this point. And that's where you get in a really, really interesting position, because if we take a look at the sea surface temperatures, these sea surface temperatures are just boiling in the region that Karl's going to be in the day 5, day 6, day 7 time frame. And this is very, very concerning, because there is the potential for explosive development when it gets in this range. And if the models are wrong, that's a big if, about that ridge breaking down, you're going to have a much more western solution than they're showing. So that's all for now. I've already gone close to 15 minutes, which is probably too long. But that's kind of what we're looking at. So Plenty of time to watch it. We'll see what happens, but watch to see if the models keep showing what they're showing with that ridge breaking down the long range. I think they might be overdoing it.